Russia has been cut off from the Starlink system, and Ukraine now holds the advantage on the battlefield. Ukraine is fully exploiting that edge. Counteroffensives are being launched, and Ukraine is gradually reclaiming territories. But this is not Ukraine's true strategy. What we are witnessing now is a shift in Ukrainian tactics that will make Russia's 715,000 troops pay for what they have done in this country. This is not just about recapturing land. It is about fortifying defensive lines to the point where Russia will lose tens of thousands more soldiers in attempts to breach Ukraine's positions. Currently, Ukraine is counterattacking Russian forces in multiple areas. These areas include the adjacent provinces of Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk, both located in southeastern Ukraine.
To an inexperienced observer, this appears as a clear Ukrainian effort to roll back some of the gains Russia made in 2025 and potentially prepare for a larger counteroffensive to push deeper into the southeast. Perhaps a breakthrough through Russian defenses, which could lead to liberating a significant portion of Ukrainian territory that Russia has illegally occupied for much of the war. After all, Russia has lost access to Starlink. Now is the perfect time for Ukraine to counterattack, and that is exactly what Ukraine is doing. However, not for the reasons you might suspect. We will explain Ukraine's real objective in just a few minutes. Before that, let's go back to late January and a Russian attack that caused a massive shift on the battlefield. Before getting into the main content, comment number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, and number 4 if you love peace.
On January 27, The Guardian reported that Russian attack drones struck a passenger train in northeastern Ukraine. This was not an attack on a military target. It was a terrorist strike that killed 5 people in the Kharkiv region. In any country, a drone attack on a civilian train would be viewed the same way, as outright terrorism. There is and can be no military purpose in this. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky rightly fumed after Russia's attack. The world took notice of this latest Russian crime, including one man in particular who decided it was finally time for him to act. Following Russia's brutal attack on Ukrainian civilians, Elon Musk directed SpaceX to cut off Russia's access to Starlink satellites that Putin's forces may have used to target the train. It seems Ukraine's Starlink terminals have been whitelisted, ensuring they can be used as normal. In contrast, Russian terminals are either blacklisted or now flagged as illegitimate when Russia tries to use them. This single move has caused chaos in the Russian military ranks, as David Hambling wrote for Forbes on February 6th, explaining the impact on Russian troops is catastrophic, with some units reporting a 90% loss of internet communications. There have been reports of widespread friendly fire incidents as Russian forces struggle to distinguish friend from foe. Russia's command and control systems have been paralyzed in many areas of Ukraine, as the Starlink terminals those forces once relied on have become useless. Russian soldiers are shooting each other, getting lost in Ukraine's wilderness, and frankly disintegrating across the front lines. The Starlink disconnection has set the stage for what Ukraine is doing now. According to a United 24 media report on February 11, the Starlink cutoff has left the Russian military vulnerable to Ukrainian counterattacks. Any alternatives Russia tries to deploy are underdeveloped and insufficient to compensate for losing Starlink. And even Russian military blogs confirm that losing Starlink access has weakened Russian frontline positions by making communications and battlefield management nearly impossible. Ukraine is capitalizing on that with an advance into some of Russia's most vulnerable positions, as reported by David Axe in a February 11 article for Euromaidan Press. Ukraine has assembled what Axe calls a powerful Ukrainian army strike force. Those troops are supported by mechanized assets, including U.S.-made tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, used alongside Swedish armored personnel carriers. With the cover of these armored vehicles, Ukraine's strike forces are sweeping through some occupied territories in the country's southeast. In particular, Ukrainian assault forces are focusing on existing no-man's land areas in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions. Their goal is to eliminate the small numbers of Russian infiltrators who have slipped into these areas, converting what were once gray zones in the Ukraine war into territory fully controlled by Ukraine. Keep following us as we will dive deeper into these objectives in a few minutes. We have seen Ukraine achieve some significant gains in Zaporizhia over the past week. On February 11th, the New Voice of Ukraine reported that Ukrainian forces successfully cleared Russian infiltrators from the village of Kosivtsev in Zaporizhia province. Troops conducting search and destroy operations in the area succeeded, the media outlet said, and the settlement is now under Ukrainian control. This capped a multi-day campaign that led to Ukraine reclaiming several villages in the Zaporizhia area, including the settlements of Ternuvate and Pridorozhne. All these villages were liberated between February 8 and February 11th, once again showing how devastating the Starlink loss has been for Russian forces. Without ways to communicate with command centers, those Russian soldiers already pushed into Ukrainian drone kill zones are now disoriented. Isolated, they have nowhere to go and no way to know if reinforcements are coming. Clearly panicking in this situation, all the infiltration groups can do is hide and hope their comrades arise before Ukraine finds them. Ukraine has seized the opportunity from the Starlink mishap to reclaim some territory in the southeast, and they are achieving some immediate objectives in doing so. The first of those, as we mentioned, is eliminating the infiltration groups in the southeast that have caused Ukraine so much trouble since 2025. Russia has tried to refine its tactics over months after losing thousands of tanks and armored vehicles to Ukraine. Large-scale mechanized assaults from the war's early years have largely given way to infiltration strategies, where in some cases Russian soldiers even sneak into Ukrainian territory and disguise themselves as civilians. This tactic, known as perfidy and a crime under international humanitarian law, allows Russian soldiers to conduct ambushes and create confusion between combatants and civilians, which can lead to tragedies as civilians face higher risks of being targeted. That alone is reason enough for Ukraine to want to destroy these infiltration groups. And when Russia achieving some success with this strategy, at least in the sense of sneaking troops into Ukrainian territory and then falsely claiming that territory is fully occupied, Ukraine has clear motivation to exploit the Russian military's weakening from the Starlink cutoff to address the infiltration problem. That is exactly what they are doing, though accomplishing this objective is preparation for something else, rather than just pushing deeper into occupied territories. According to Axe's report, the Russian army under the 127th Motorized Rifle Division made slow and steady advances on the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia axes before winter slowed them down. In this advance, Russia even captured the city of Huliopol, a Ukrainian logistics hub, after forcing Ukrainian forces to withdraw in late December. With Russia now holding positions stretching about 18.6 miles from north of Huliopol to the city of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region, their forces have been and are using infiltration tactics. There is currently a gray zone, another term for no man's land, running almost parallel to the Hydeshore River in southeastern Ukraine, which Russia is filling with infiltration teams as we mentioned above. Carrying limited supplies and trying to move as quickly as possible to avoid Ukrainian drones, these infiltration teams have used Starlink terminals to aid navigation in the gray zone, disrupting Ukraine's defenses by stretching those lines thin. Now, Starlink is gone for those infiltration groups. They are stuck in the gray zone, and one by one, soldiers are falling to Ukrainian strike forces. At the cost of at least one Australian-donated M1A1 Abrams tank and a Swedish PBV-302 armored personnel carrier, the strike units quickly dislodged Russian infiltrators from 5 settlements, including a few areas on the other side of the Hydeshore River, Axe pointed out. In other words, the gray zones are no longer gray. They belong to Ukraine, and that leads to the new strategy to crush the 715,000 Russian soldiers currently inside Ukrainian territory. We will soon learn what that new strategy entails.
It is stabilizing the southeastern Ukraine region rather than trying to push for more territorial gains. One of Ukraine's biggest problems in the southeastern territories is that the fortifications there were relatively weak when Russia began its invasion, and they have not improved much since. Going back to May 2024, we saw the impact of these poor fortifications after the fall of Avdiivka in the Pokrovsk region. According to an AP News report at the time, Ukrainian soldiers complained about the lack of defensive lines in the rear behind that city, which was likely the main reason Russia claimed that capturing Avdiivka allowed them to quickly move on to attacks against Pokrovsk. Batkiar, a unit commander who spoke to AP News, summed up the issue succinctly.
The pace of building fortifications needs to be accelerated so that when we retreat to a prepared position, Batyar told the outlet, adding, "These fortifications are insufficient." The situation was so bad that Taras Kuzio, a professor of political science at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, wrote a lengthy article for the New Voice of Ukraine in April 2025, questioning who was responsible for Ukraine losing the southeast. Kuzio placed at least some blame for the southeast's collapse on Ukraine itself, writing, "Zelensky is at fault for ignoring Russian spy infiltration into the SBU, appointing Ivan Bakanov, who had no experience in intelligence operations, as SBU head, and being too naive about Vladimir Putin, especially in 2019, as well as Russian imperialism. Zelensky did not prepare adequate defenses on the Kherson-Crimea line, for example, failing to order minefields laid," Kuzio assented.
In other words, Ukraine did not do enough preparation for what Putin essentially announced would happen after annexing Crimea and parts of Donbass in 2014. Sadly, Ukraine paid the price with the loss of significant southern and southeastern territories. That brings us back to the real goal behind the counterattacks Ukraine is launching against Russia in the southeast. These assaults are not to reclaim vast territories. Frankly, Ukraine does not have enough troops to reverse the extensive gains Putin's forces made in the invasion's early phase. But what Ukraine does have is enough soldiers to push Russian infiltration teams out of the gray zones in Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk.
That is exactly what they are doing, and they are doing it so they can convert those gray zones into solidly fortified Ukrainian territory, where Russia will have to pour in countless soldiers if they want any chance of advancing again. This is a smart move by Ukraine. Their strategy is to attrit the enemy through defense, rather than risking soldiers' lives to try for major gains. French military analyst Clement Mollin explained what he sees in southeastern Ukraine in an X-post. Some are talking about Uspanivka as a target, which might be feasible. This area is hard for Russia to maneuver, we've seen from impact maps. But I don't think it will happen, Milan suggested, adding, "The top priority is protecting the Haicher River and approaches to Pokrovsk. This will buy time to keep improving fortifications in the area."
And that is Ukraine's ultimate strategy: to fix the mistakes of the shaky southeastern defenses by turning what were gray zones when Russia had Starlink access into true kill zones that will destroy any Russian soldiers trying to infiltrate or attack through them. It may not be what many expected after seeing what Ukraine has been and is doing, but it is a strategy that will lead to the deaths of a huge number of Russian soldiers, and here is why. According to the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, the Kremlin is preparing for a new summer offensive, similar to the one we saw in 2025. That offensive failed to capture Pokrovsk, which was the main strategic goal, so we can speculate that this new offensive will include Russia trying to take that city before pushing deeper into Donetsk. Beyond signaling that Putin has no intention of ending the war he started, despite claims to the contrary, this new summer offensive will focus on the Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, and Orekhiv-Zaporizhia directions.
In other words, right at the gray zones Ukraine has reclaimed and is now working to fortify, if we believe what Mullin says. However, a problem is emerging for this strategy. As ISW explains, the Russian military command is reportedly planning to commit potentially limited strategic reserves to a planned 2026 summer offensive in southern and/or eastern Ukraine. The key word here is limited. What Russia is planning to do is launch a new offensive despite the fact that their reserves are nearly depleted. And the people Russia is about to send into Ukraine for this offensive are likely to be the least competent soldiers. According to a United 24 media report on February 10th, the average Russian soldier now spends a mere 10 days in training before being pushed to the front lines to serve as cannon fodder for Putin's war. In short, Russia has run out of experienced or capable troops. They are simply sending meat shields, most of which have been ground up when hitting Ukrainian defenses in places like Pokrovsk.
This is where Ukraine's new fortification strategy comes into play. Ukraine could attack these subpar forces, and that might yield some gains. But again, there are 715,000 Russian troops in Ukraine now. Even with the most skilled soldiers, Ukraine faces a significant numerical disadvantage, which would lead to heavy casualties on both sides if launching a full counteroffensive. Ukraine wants casualties to be one-sided. Creating new fortifications after liberating key southeastern territories is the way to achieve that. Ukraine has already been working toward what we are seeing now.
According to a January 29 article in the Defense Post, the Ukrainian Developers Association has built about 1.24 miles of defensive infrastructure along the Eastern Front, connecting 12 underground positions with communication lines, all aimed at bolstering Ukraine's defenses. While it is unknown if something similar is being built in the gray zones Ukraine controls, we are almost certain to see trenches dug, dragon's teeth placed, mines laid, razor wire strung everywhere, and of course, FPV drones that will turn the area into a kill zone. These are enhanced fortifications that did not exist before, and 2025 taught Ukraine that they can inflict massive losses on Russia using this type of defense.
The Atlantic Council noted this, stating that there has been a fairly significant shift in Ukraine's defensive approach that we started seeing in 2025. Ukraine is building small-scale fortification nodes used to funnel Russian troops into predetermined kill zones, where those soldiers will be pummeled by drones and artillery. By creating choke points for the Russian military, Ukraine aims to maximize Kremlin casualties and leverage its inherent advantages as the defender in a war of attrition. It seems this is what Ukraine intends to create in the Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk areas, and the country knows this approach will work.
2025 was a bad year for Russian soldiers. For much of the year, Putin's only strategy seemed to be throwing troops at Ukrainian defenses in hopes those defenses would collapse. We saw the results at Pokrovsk, where Russia was over half a year late in capturing that city compared to Putin's desires. By year's end, Russia had suffered an estimated 415,000 battlefield casualties, according to the national interest, all for a fraction of Ukrainian territory. That is exactly the impact Ukraine's fortifications deliver. And early 2026 is no better for Russia.
According to Ukraine's commander-in-chief Oleksandr Syrsky, Russia lost 31,700 soldiers in January, about 9,000 more than the country can recruit. Ukraine has also set a goal to increase this to 50,000 per month, which would lead to them crushing the 715,000 Russian soldiers now in Ukraine. What we are seeing in Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk is Ukraine building on a strategy they know will work. Russia has no plan B. They do not even have a clear plan A. For Ukraine, this is a case of if you build it, the Russians will come.
Only build it here means deadly fortifications, and the Russian soldiers who come will never see the light of day again. Some, including Seth G. Jones, Senior Vice President and Director of the International Security Program, and Harold Brown, Chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, argue that Russia has long tried to hide its true casualty figures. In a separate report, CSIS also stated that it is conceivable the casualty count for the Ukraine war could reach 2 million when including both sides, but Russia is the one bearing the brunt of those losses. They are the attackers. Ukraine is defending, and with the new strategy, they are making their defenses more effective than ever.
The only tactic Putin has left is sending cannon fodder soldiers into Ukraine. In Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk, that cannon fodder will hit newly fortified defenses, which will destroy them. And with Starlink still disconnected and no suitable replacement in sight, it is highly likely we will see Ukraine make more advances in the coming weeks, all in service of the new fortification strategy. 2026 will not be Russia's year of victory. It will be the year that 715,000 Russian soldiers pay for Putin's failures. Where Ukraine once focused solely on survival, now they are ready to take the initiative against Russia. That is dangerous for Putin's weakened forces. In yesterday's video, we had a question. How many soldiers has Russia lost in the first 60 days of 2026? The correct answer is A, over 50,000 soldiers. That is an unimaginable number, with 31,700 soldiers taken out of action in January, at an average attrition rate of 1.4 minutes per soldier, a record for a modern war. February is even more brutal, with estimates possibly reaching over 40,000 Russian soldiers taken out of action. And the main reason is truly ironic. All because of Elon Musk, loss of Starlink connection.
Surprisingly, many viewers of the channel answered correctly. Now for today's question. Currently, what is the average training time for a new Russian recruit before going to the front line? Answer A, at least 3 months. Answer B, 10 days. Answer the question in the video comment section. Don't forget to comment number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, or number 4 if you love peace.